The house on Maple Street looked ordinary enough from the outside. A modest two-story colonial with cream siding and black shutters that blended perfectly into the middle-class neighborhood. To anyone driving by, it appeared to be exactly what my father had been telling everyone for the past 5 years. A simple rental property that his son lived in while figuring out his life direction and learning responsibility through paying rent. What Dad didn't know was that 1247 Maple Street was classified as federal property under a specialized housing program for government employees with security clearances. The house had been purchased through the Federal Employee Housing Trust, a little-known program that provides secure housing for personnel working on sensitive government projects. The purchase was legitimate, legal, and completely invisible to family members who assumed I was just another 28-year-old struggling to afford market-rate housing. My job at the Department of Energy required top-secret clearance with Special Access Programs authorization. The work involved nuclear security protocols and international treaty verification, the kind of position where your housing situation undergoes background checks and your neighbors get interviewed by federal investigators. The Housing Trust Program existed specifically to protect employees like me from security vulnerabilities that could arise from normal real estate transactions or landlord relationships. Dad knew I worked for the government doing computer stuff, but assumed it was a basic IT support position with standard benefits and average pay. He'd never asked for details about my clearance level, project assignments, or the specialized housing requirements that came with my position. To him, I was just his underachieving son who'd gotten lucky with a stable government job after wasting time with college computer classes. The family narrative was simple. Dad had co-signed for a rental house to help me establish independence, and I paid him monthly rent which he then forwarded to the real landlord. He told everyone this arrangement was teaching me financial responsibility while protecting me from the complications of dealing directly with property management companies. Extended family praised his patience and wisdom in helping his struggling son learn to handle adult responsibilities gradually. In reality, the Federal Housing Trust had purchased the property outright and assigned it to me as primary resident under security protocols. No rent was due, no landlord existed, and the property title was held in trust by the federal government with me as the designated occupant. The monthly payments I gave Dad were actually voluntary contributions to a family vacation fund he'd established, money I provided to maintain family harmony while protecting the security classification of my actual housing situation. This arrangement had worked perfectly for 5 years. Dad got to play the role of helpful father managing his son's housing situation. Family members respected his patience with my financial immaturity, and I avoided complications that could arise from explaining federal security housing protocols to relatives who didn't have clearance to understand such programs. The system only had one vulnerability. Dad truly believed he had some form of ownership or management authority over my rental situation. He'd never seen the actual property documents, never met any landlord, and never questioned why the housing was so affordable for such a nice neighborhood. His assumptions about the arrangement were based entirely on the cover story we'd maintained to protect operational security. I should have anticipated that those assumptions might eventually lead to problems. The trouble began when I took a 2-week vacation to visit college friends in Colorado. The trip was planned months in advance and coordinated with my security officer to ensure all clearance requirements were met. I'd followed standard protocols for travel notification, provided emergency contact information, and arranged for house security monitoring through the appropriate federal channels. What I hadn't anticipated was Dad's reaction to the extended absence. He'd been managing his own financial pressures lately: Mom's medical bills from her knee surgery, unexpected home repairs, and my sister Claire's wedding expenses that had spiraled beyond their original budget. The family was facing about $30,000 in combined costs just as Dad's construction business hit a seasonal slow period. 3 days into my vacation, Dad called with what he described as an amazing opportunity that had fallen into his lap at exactly the right time. A neighbor had mentioned that houses on Maple Street were selling quickly in the current market, often for significantly more than their assessed values. Dad had started researching comparable sales and discovered that similar properties were moving for $280,000 to $320,000. "It's perfect timing," he explained during our phone conversation. "The market is hot, you're not even using the house right now, and we could help you transition into something more suitable for your budget. Plus, the family could really use the financial boost from the sale commission." I tried explaining that the housing situation was more complicated than he understood, but Dad had already moved past listening to developing his sales strategy. He'd contacted Janet Morrison, a real estate agent who lived 2 streets over, and scheduled her to come look at the property for a market evaluation. The conversation ended with him saying he'd handle everything professionally and make sure I got the best possible deal. Over the next week, Dad's daily calls became increasingly excited as he researched market conditions and developed marketing plans. Janet had evaluated the property at $295,000 and already had 2 interested buyers from her client list. The house showed beautifully, the neighborhood was desirable, and buyers were making offers above asking price in the current market. "This is going to solve everyone's problems," Dad announced during one particularly enthusiastic call. "You'll have enough money to get a more affordable apartment, we can cover Mom's medical bills and Claire's wedding costs, and you'll finally be free from the stress of carrying such an expensive rental payment." I kept trying to explain that he couldn't sell property he didn't own, but Dad dismissed these concerns as rental confusion and not understanding real estate processes. He'd convinced himself that his cosigner status gave him the authority to make beneficial decisions on my behalf, especially when I was unavailable to handle the details personally. The calls stopped completely on day 10 of my vacation. When I tried reaching Dad, his phone went straight to voicemail. Mom said he was handling some important business and would call me back soon. Claire mentioned that Dad was working on something big that would solve all our financial stress. On day 12, I received a text message with a photo of a sold sign in front of 1247 Maple Street. The message read, "Surprise. Got you $310,000, well above asking price. Closing is next week. Family meeting Sunday to celebrate and plan next steps." That's when I realized Dad had actually gone through with selling federal property without authorization, apparently believing he had the legal right to do so based on his misunderstanding of our housing arrangement. The situation had moved far beyond family miscommunication into potential federal crime territory. I cut my vacation short immediately. I arrived home Saturday evening to find my driveway blocked by Claire's car, Uncle Mike's truck and Aunt Sarah's SUV. Through the front windows I could see the family gathered in my living room, clearly in celebration mode with drinks, snacks, and what appeared to be real estate documents spread across my coffee table. Dad answered the door with the biggest smile I'd seen from him in months. "There's the man of the hour. Come see what we've accomplished while you were playing around in Colorado." He was practically bouncing with excitement as he led me into the living room where the family had assembled for what was obviously intended as a surprise celebration. "Surprise!" everyone shouted as I entered the room. Mom, Claire, Uncle Mike, Aunt Sarah, and my cousins Tommy and Lisa were all gathered around the coffee table where the property documents were displayed like trophies. A bottle of champagne was open, glasses were being passed around, and everyone looked genuinely excited about whatever they thought they were celebrating. "We sold your house," Claire announced, holding up her champagne glass. "Dad got you an amazing deal, $310,000, which is $15,000 over asking price. You're going to have enough money to get a really nice apartment and still have plenty left over for a new car or whatever you want." Dad was beaming as he picked up the sales contract and waved it dramatically. "This is what good family planning looks like. Instead of throwing money away on expensive rent, you'll have real capital to build your future properly. And the timing couldn't be better for helping the family through our current financial challenges." Uncle Mike raised his glass for a toast. "To smart financial decisions and family members who look out for each other. This kind of thinking is how you build real wealth instead of just getting by month to month." The enthusiasm in the room was genuine and infectious. Everyone truly believed they were celebrating a brilliant financial decision that would solve multiple family problems simultaneously. Dad had clearly presented the sale as a collaborative family effort that demonstrated wisdom, timing, and mutual support. I looked around the room at all the happy faces, then at the real estate documents on my coffee table, then back at my father who was waiting for my grateful response to his successful surprise. The champagne glasses, the congratulatory atmosphere, and the obvious family pride in their accomplishment made what I had to do next particularly difficult. "Dad," I said quietly, "who did you actually sell the house to?" "The Hendersons. That young couple who've been looking in this neighborhood for 8 months. Janet says they're pre-approved for financing, they love the house exactly as it is, and they're planning to close next Friday. It's a perfect match. And you signed the sales contract as what, the owner? Dad's smile flickered slightly, but he maintained his confident tone. As your legal representative with power of attorney for the property. We discussed this before. I'm the co-signer on the rental agreement, which gives me the authority to make beneficial decisions when you're unavailable. That's when I realized the full scope of the misunderstanding. Dad hadn't just mistakenly sold property he didn't own, he'd also signed legal documents claiming authority he didn't possess, using a power of attorney that didn't exist, representing ownership of federal property that was classified under security protocols he had no clearance to understand. The family was still waiting for my grateful response to their surprise when I pulled out my phone and called Jonathan Pierce, my real estate attorney who specialized in federal property law and security clearance issues. The call connected immediately. Jonathan, it's Dave. I need you to get to 1247 Maple Street immediately. My father just sold federal security housing without authorization, and the buyers are planning to close on Friday. The room went absolutely silent. Every conversation stopped, every champagne glass froze halfway to lips, and every family member stared at me with expressions ranging from confusion to concern. Dad's confident smile disappeared completely as he processed what he'd just heard. Federal security housing? Dad's voice was barely a whisper. What are you talking about? This is your rental house that we've been paying for together. I stayed on the phone with Jonathan while the family listened to one side of a conversation that was clearly much more serious than they'd anticipated. Yes, the DOE Housing Trust property. No, he had no authorization. The buyers need to be contacted immediately before they invest any more money in this transaction. When I hung up, the celebration atmosphere had completely evaporated. Everyone was staring at me with obvious confusion and growing concern, while Dad looked like he was trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. Dave, Mom said carefully, what did you mean by federal security housing? This is the rental house that your father has been helping you manage for 5 years. This house belongs to the federal government, I explained as gently as possible. It's provided through a security housing program for DOE employees with classified clearances. There is no rent, no landlord, and no authority for anyone except federal administrators to transfer ownership. Dad sank into his chair as the implications began settling in. But, you've been giving me rent money every month. I thought I was helping you manage the property payments. That money was for the family vacation fund. The house payments are handled directly through federal payroll deduction. I've never paid rent to anyone. The room fell silent as everyone processed this information. Claire looked at the sales contract in her hands as if it had suddenly become a poisonous snake. Uncle Mike set down his champagne glass and stared at the celebration setup with obvious horror. The family success story they'd been toasting had just transformed into a potential federal crime. Aunt Sarah was the first to find her voice. Are you saying this whole sale is illegal? I'm saying Dad just signed documents claiming to own federal property that's protected under security classification protocols. The Department of Energy is going to want to know how civilian buyers gained access to classified housing information. That's when we heard a car door slam in the driveway, followed by rapid footsteps on the front walkway. Jonathan Pierce had made excellent time, probably because federal property issues get immediate priority attention from attorneys who understand the potential consequences. The doorbell rang as the family sat in stunned silence, still holding their champagne glasses while contemplating the complete collapse of their celebration. I answered the door to find Jonathan carrying a briefcase and wearing the expression of someone who'd been through this type of situation before. Where's the sales contract? He asked immediately, stepping into the room where my family was assembled in various stages of shock and confusion. Dad silently handed over the documents while Jonathan introduced himself to the room. I'm Jonathan Pierce, federal property attorney. I need to contact the buyers immediately to halt this transaction before it creates additional legal complications. He reviewed the contract quickly, his expression growing more serious with each page. Mr. Thompson, did you represent yourself as the property owner when you signed these documents? Dad nodded miserably. I thought I had authority as co-signer on his rental agreement. I was trying to help him make a smart financial decision. Sir, you just attempted to sell federal property that's classified under the Department of Energy Security Housing Program. The buyers need to be contacted immediately, and we need to file incident reports with both DOE security and the FBI field office." The word FBI hit the room like a physical blow. Mom gasped audibly, Claire dropped the sales contract, and Uncle Mike looked like he might faint. The family celebration had transformed into a federal investigation in the span of 10 minutes. Jonathan was already dialing his phone. "Janet Morrison? This is Jonathan Pierce, federal property attorney. You need to contact the Henderson family immediately and inform them that the Maple Street property sale is void due to unauthorized transfer of classified federal housing." He paused, listening to her response. "No ma'am, this isn't a title dispute. This is federal property that cannot be sold by civilian parties under any circumstances. The Department of Energy will be contacting you Monday morning for a formal statement." When he hung up, the room was absolutely silent except for Mom's quiet crying and Dad's heavy breathing. The family gathering that had started as a celebration of smart financial planning had become the most serious legal situation any of them had ever encountered. "What happens now?" Dad asked quietly, his voice completely different from the confident tone he'd used to announce the surprise sale. "Now we cooperate fully with the federal investigation, hope the buyers understand they were deceived unintentionally, and pray that DOE security accepts this as a misunderstanding rather than a deliberate security breach," Jonathan replied. "Mr. Thompson, you're going to need your own attorney who specializes in federal criminal defense." The champagne was still open on the coffee table, but no one was celebrating anymore. The family success story had become a cautionary tale about assumptions, authority, and the serious consequences of selling property you don't actually own. Especially when that property belongs to the federal government and is protected under national security protocols. Monday morning arrived with 3 phone calls that transformed our family's understanding of how seriously the federal government treats unauthorized transfers of classified property. The first call was from Agent Sarah Chin, FBI field office, requesting an immediate interview with Dad about the attempted property sale. The second was from DOE security asking me to report to the federal building for a clearance review meeting. The third was from Janet Morrison, who'd spent the weekend researching federal property law and was now terrified about her own legal exposure. Dad hired Michael Roberts, a criminal defense attorney who specialized in federal cases, after Jonathan Pierce explained that standard real estate lawyers wouldn't understand the national security implications of the situation. The legal fees alone were going to cost more than the family had hoped to gain from the house sale, adding financial stress to what was already an incredibly tense situation. The Henderson family, who'd been planning to move into their dream house on Friday, were understandably upset when they learned the property sale was not only void but potentially involved federal crimes. Their attorney was threatening lawsuits against Dad, Janet Morrison, and anyone else involved in what they characterized as fraudulent misrepresentation of property ownership. They'd already arranged financing, scheduled movers, and given notice on their current apartment. Agent Chen's interview with Dad lasted 4 hours and covered every detail of his understanding about the property ownership, his decision-making process for the sale, and his access to information about my employment and security clearance. She was professional but thorough, clearly trying to determine whether Dad's actions represented innocent misunderstanding or some form of intentional security breach. My own clearance review was equally intensive. DOE security wanted to understand how family members had gained enough information about my housing situation to attempt unauthorized property transfers. They reviewed my operational security practices, family communication protocols, and the effectiveness of the cover story I'd maintained to protect classified housing details. The questioning was particularly focused on whether I'd adequately protected sensitive information about federal employee housing programs and whether my family relationships posed ongoing security risks. They needed to determine if my clearance could be maintained or if the incident represented a fundamental failure of information protection that required security status changes. Jonathan Pierce worked throughout the week to minimize legal exposure for all parties while coordinating with federal agencies, the real estate agents, and the disappointed buyers. His primary goal was establishing that Dad's actions resulted from genuine misunderstanding rather than deliberate fraud or security violations. The breakthrough came when Agent Chen's investigation confirmed that Dad had no prior knowledge of federal housing programs, no access to classified information, and no understanding of the security implications of his actions. Her report characterized the incident as civilian misunderstanding of government employee housing arrangements, rather than attempted unauthorized transfer of classified federal property. DOE Security reached similar conclusions after reviewing my operational security practices and family communication history. They determined that I'd maintained appropriate information protection and that Dad's assumptions about property ownership were reasonable based on the cover story necessary to protect security classifications. By Friday, the legal situation had stabilized enough for Jonathan to negotiate resolutions with all affected parties. The Henderson family agreed to a financial settlement covering their moving costs and temporary housing expenses in exchange for dropping threatened lawsuits. Janet Morrison's real estate license survived the incident after she completed additional training on federal property identification and verification procedures. Dad's legal exposure was minimized to civil penalties rather than criminal charges, partly because his cooperation with the investigation was complete and immediate, and partly because Agent Chen's report supported the innocent misunderstanding conclusion. Michael Roberts negotiated a settlement that included financial penalties but no jail time or permanent legal record. The family dynamic, however, required much longer to repair. Dad was devastated by the realization that his helpful surprise had nearly resulted in federal criminal charges and had cost the family thousands of dollars in legal fees and settlements. The confident patriarch who'd organized the celebration was replaced by someone who questioned every assumption about his understanding of his children's lives. Mom struggled with the discovery that I'd been living in federal security housing for 5 years without the family knowing the truth about my work or clearance level. She felt excluded from important parts of my life and worried about what other secrets might exist that could affect family relationships or create legal complications. Claire and the extended family were shocked by how quickly their celebration had transformed into a federal investigation. The incident became a permanent reminder about the importance of understanding legal authority before making major decisions and the potential consequences of assumptions about property ownership. 3 months later, I received approval to provide limited information about my work and housing situation to immediate family members. DOE Security had concluded that the incident actually demonstrated the effectiveness of operational security protocols and that controlled disclosure would reduce risks of future misunderstandings. The family meeting where I explained my actual job responsibilities, security clearance requirements, and housing arrangements was emotional and difficult. Dad cried when he realized how much stress he'd caused and how completely he'd misunderstood my professional situation. Mom expressed both pride in my career achievements and sadness about feeling excluded from such important parts of my life. But the most significant change was in our family communication patterns. The incident had demonstrated the dangers of assumptions and the importance of honest conversations about complicated situations. We established new protocols for discussing major decisions that might affect other family members and created systems for verifying authority before taking actions that seemed helpful but might have unintended consequences. 6 months later, Dad received a letter from the Department of Energy thanking him for his cooperation with their security investigation and acknowledging that his actions, while problematic, had resulted from understandable misunderstanding rather than malicious intent. The letter noted that his case was being used as a training example for improving security communication protocols. The house on Maple Street remained my residence under federal security housing protocols, though the family now understood the actual arrangement and the restrictions that governed the property. Dad established a legitimate vacation fund for family financial planning, and I continued making voluntary contributions that were now clearly designated as gifts rather than rental payments. The sold sign was removed from the yard within hours of Jonathan Pierce's phone call to Janet Morrison, but the memory of that sign and the celebration it had triggered became a permanent family story about assumptions, authority, and the importance of understanding what you actually own before trying to sell it. Today, when Dad tells the story to friends and neighbors, it's become a cautionary tale about real estate transactions and the importance of verifying ownership before signing contracts. He emphasizes the legal education he received and the professional relationships he developed with attorneys who specialize in federal property law. But for our family, the story represents something deeper. The discovery that protecting people sometimes requires keeping secrets from them, that helping people sometimes requires understanding situations more completely than good intentions alone can provide, and that the most dangerous assumptions are often the ones that seem most reasonable based on incomplete information. The house still looks ordinary from the outside, cream siding, black shutters, perfectly blended into the neighborhood. But everyone who knows the story understands that appearances can be deceiving, that federal property exists in unexpected places, and that the authority to sell something requires more than good intentions and family relationships. Sometimes the son who appears to be struggling with rent payments actually lives in federal security housing. Sometimes the helpful father who thinks he's managing property decisions is actually attempting to sell government assets. And sometimes the celebration of smart financial planning is actually the beginning of a federal investigation that teaches everyone involved more about property law than they ever wanted to know.